Back to our top story. Donald Trump found guilty on all 34 counts in his hush money case, convicted of falsifying records to cover up a sex scandal that threatened his rise to power in 2016. He's the first ever U.S. president, past or present, to become a convicted felon. Will he end up behind bars? Will the conviction help or hurt his chances in November? And what about his other legal challenges? Let's try and get some answers from the nation's capital. We can speak to Eric Lisann, legal analyst and former U.S. federal prosecutor. Hello to you, Eric. If you're watching TV in America Live, it's really remarkable seeing the verdict read out one by one. What was your reaction as it was being read?
Well, there's obviously a sense of history profound that's being made and that's understood. It was tempered a little bit by surprise at the rapidity of it all, even though the conclusion was very logical. So it seemed almost certain, if unbelievable, that the guilty verdict would come. But since it's also the first time, not only in history, but the first time that something serious of this magnitude seems to have befallen Trump, there was a sense of disbelief engendered by that as well. I think most people thought it would come at the earliest today, but it is true at the same time that the evidence, though voluminous, was also very clear and very strong, and the jury did its job. But this is something that everybody will remember for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, very quick deliberation. Next up, we, of course, have sentencing. What do you expect to come from that?
That's going to be a big question mark as well. That's going to be the 11th of July. Normally in a case like this, definitely jail is a possibility, but it's not a certainty. So a lot of it really will rest with the discretion of the judge. There'll be a study, a report, and a recommendation made by the New York Judicial System Office of Pretrial Services, which does this for all defendants. They'll take into account, it'll be very interesting, Trump's personal history, as well as his criminal history. This is his first conviction, but they'll put it into the context of his other behavior. They'll have to factor in, if they want, the context of the presidential election. They'll compare it with other cases. They'll make a recommendation to the judge that will be also commented on by both the prosecution and the defense. They will submit their own recommendations, and then they will argue it orally before the judge on the 11th of July, and that is when he will pronounce his sentence, which may or may not be a term of imprisonment. So it's very much 50-50.
Yeah, House Majority Leader Steve Scalise said that this verdict would not stand up to appeal. Is that how you're reading it as well? I'm guessing not.
Oh, no, not necessarily, though it's true that from a legal point of view, there are some interesting questions, not on the facts. On the facts, the case is overwhelming, but the way the New York laws were used was a little bit novel because it was aimed towards a federal election. And normally in a case like this, the federal prosecutors would have taken it on. It clearly came within their ambit of responsibility. And in fact, they had prosecuted Michael Cohen, and he'd gone to jail, and they had made clear that the whole scheme was to benefit Trump. But yet they didn't pursue it against Trump, in large part, obviously, because the heads of the federal prosecution services at that time were closely allied with Trump. And as we know now, they interfered with the progress of that case to a certain extent. And then it never got picked up under the administration of Merrick Garland. But because New York did pick it up, they used their own statutes in a way that is a matter of first impression. I think it's correct, but that's something that certainly will be explored along with some other issues on appeal. So it's not impossible that something could happen on appeal. We probably won't know that for close to a year.
As a legal professional, I'm curious what you think about how Donald Trump or maybe his supporters view someone like you. Republican Congressman Jim Corden called this a travesty of justice, a kangaroo court. When you hear remarks like that from the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, what does it make you think?
Well, that's even the Senate, Cornyn, but no, that's pure propaganda.
Jim Jordan, Jim Jordan.
Oh, Jim Jordan, yes, in the House. Yeah, well, Jordan is a known propagandist, and this is all part of a propaganda campaign. So that they're launching, it does bear some resemblance to a cult, as is often said. There's no denying that, the way they unite against all the facts behind one man to try to consistently push one storyline of victimhood and tearing down the system. It's a very dangerous process. We are, in fact, entering a very dangerous time despite this conviction. This conviction was in many ways inevitable and necessary and mandated by the rule of law, but it is going to open up a struggle within society as to what is true or not. While these proceedings were not televised, they were reported on in real time, live by dozens or hundreds of members, really, of the press, both domestic and international. So people were following it. We have transcripts. The evidence is overwhelming. So ultimately, people will be able to see from themselves what happened. It was in no sense a travesty of justice, but it is damaging for the president, both personally and politically, and humiliating for him. And this is the way he's reacting. But now the country is going to be left with the difficult task of sorting all of this out.
In regards to Trump's other legal cases, what do you think is in store for us?
Well, those are very serious cases and will certainly result in a sentence of imprisonment if they result in a conviction beforehand. The big questions there are, will they ever go to trial? The two of them, the two other federal ones, the Mar-a-Lago Espionage Act violations and the January 6th insurrection case in Washington, D.C., should have started and even been concluded by now, but the system has not worked properly. The prosecution was very slow in bringing those cases and investigating them correctly, and then judicial misgivings, problems at the level even of the Supreme Court and at the trial level in Florida have slowed those cases down. So we don't know for certain whether those cases are going to go, because if they don't go before Trump, before the election, and Trump wins the election and manages to resume power, he will certainly stop those cases. So there's a lot of question marks there, even though those are major cases, and a lot of the evidence is already publicly known.
All right, Eric, thank you very much for your time and your analysis. And Eric Lisann speaking to us from Washington.
My pleasure.
That's it for Paris Direct. Please stay tuned to France 24.